Welcome to Still Plays Galaxy of Heroes. This is a talk video, and today we are back with the Tarfful kit reveal. We're going to do our typical things here. The developer insights, breakdown analysis of the kit, speculate on some squad synergies, talk about the obvious candidates, and also a couple others who I think are interesting to consider, and then wrap up as we do with the free-to-play gearing of my roster. The wait is over. Tarfful is incoming, getting us one step closer to Jedi Survivor Cal's Hero Journey event. Tarfful is a support leader whose introduction will also bring the Wookiee tag and maybe Clone Wars Chewbacca some meaningful viability. With the developer insights, or what used to be the developer insights, I wish CG could just be consistent and make a choice to either put this at the top or at the bottom of these posts instead of constantly changing it. Maybe just go back to it being a whole separate thing because they can't make a choice about it. The attributes is usually an area I like to emphasize. This time I think it's slightly annoying. It's very memey. Usually this is a section with some substance. The main points here being Wookiee tag and Wookiee synergy incoming. Defense is the key mechanic that Tarfful is going to be exploiting, and it impacts the offensive stats as well. So this is a defense mod priority character. The strategy tips, the other area I really like to emphasize, they reiterate the mechanic of defense, they qualify that he will not work against GLs, or at least a portion of his kit won't, and highlight that synergistic allies like Veton and Mission Veo retain their utility. Now on to our kit analysis. The basic ability, the DC-15S Blaster, physical damage to the target and dispel buffs. Wookiee allies gain defense penetration up, defense up, and protection up. Fairly minimal ability here, nice buff spread. Clearly his purpose is not to do damage, but to make the squad itself tanky. Constantly putting up protection up on a basic is strong, and making sure defense penetration up is on everyone else will help them do damage. This is also kind of ability that I'm going to be looking for some future Datacron synergy with. This is a type of thing where buff synergy on a level 3 ability would be very nice if they don't have a dedicated Datacron. With the first special, Wookiee Fury, this is a cooldown of 4, and that is a big cooldown. For the ability, Wookiee allies gain 25% defense stacking rest of the encounter. Wookiee allies mass assist and stun target. Then ally attackers gain crit damage up, healers and support gain speed up, and tanks taunt. Key thing here for me is the mass assist and the stacking defense. Very likely we'll want to use this ability first and start increasing that damage output, but this ability is supplemented with a few other nice mechanics in the control with the stun and taunt trigger for tanks. But in a battle, we probably won't utilize this ability too many times, but it's nice that over the course of the battle, this team will become more offensively dangerous. So we are probably going to want to beat them quickly if we have the option. The second special cooldown of 3, AoE Cleanse, gain 2-turn 50% crit damage. Wookiee allies gain potency up and tenacity up and gain 10% max health stacking for the rest of the encounter. AoE inflict provoked on enemies, and that is unevadable. This ability, relatively minor. What really matters here is the AoE inflict of provoke. That debuff was introduced with Fifth Brother, and it guarantees that enemies with that debuff will counter when attacked. That guaranteed countered by enemies will have downstream effects with unique and the leadership that will end up increasing the damage output of this squad. The unique ability Better Together brings us the first of 2 Zeta abilities. Tarfful has 30% tenacity and plus 20 speed. Whenever an ally cleanses a buff, Tarfful gains 10% turn meter. If there are at least 3 Wookiee allies active at the start, whenever an enemy attacks out of his turn, all allies gain 25 speed, stacking max 500 for 1 turn. Whenever a Wookiee ally gains health up, all allies recover 50% health and protection, gain advantage for 1 turn. And whenever a Wookiee ally has retribution, Wookiee allies inflict damage over time to the target enemy for 2 turns when they use a basic, which is unavailable. And if Vet Smug Chewbacca is an ally, whenever Tarfful uses... Now this next portion here we're going to take in chunks. I don't want to get bogged down with the details, and we're going to explore some more of this in the Synergies portion. There's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of potential lineup possibilities that are created by this unique. We can take this squad in a number of perfectly viable directions if there are at least 3 Wookiee allies active at the start. So this portion, right off the bat, we know that we're going to be utilizing this team one way in 3v3, one way in 5v5. In 5v5 we have more flexibility. In 3v3 we have to be using just Wookiees. In 5v5 we can be adding other characters, most obviously Mission Veo and Veteran Smuggler Han. First, we have whenever an enemy attacks out of turn, all allies gain 25 speed, stacking max 500 for 1 turn. And here's already we have a portion that I was referring to with the second special, where that ability applies provoked. With that debuff on the enemy, then they are going to counter, do those attacks out of turn, which is going to be giving a lot of speed to the squad. And since this is stacking speed for only 1 turn, this is really going to benefit from characters who can do AoEs, which is going to just increase the amount of stacking speed quickly, which there are minimal options for right now, and that's where Veteran Smuggler Han both benefit. Up next, we have whenever a Wookiee ally gains health up, all allies recover 50% health and protection, gain advantage for 1 turn. The only Wookiee right now that can do that is going to be Clone Wars Chewbacca. So he's a candidate for one of these slots. We'll talk more about that in detail again, but this portion of the ability is specifically referring to him, at least for now. Whenever a Wookiee ally has retribution, Wookiee allies inflict damage over time to target enemy for 2 turns when they use a basic, and that is unavailable, but not unresistible. This whole portion of the unique here is very specifically written with the intent of Zelbar, and this is also why mission is going to be pretty important to this squad, because the retribution is only triggered on Zelbar when mission is present. And one of the things that's nice on this unique is it is ensuring to retain the functionality that Zelbar has under Carthonasis, because the protection recovery is related to damage over times, and this portion of the unique is making sure that the damage over times are still being applied so that Zelbar will recover protection. The last portion here is if Veteran Smuggler Chewbacca is an ally, whenever Tarfful uses Veteran Smuggler Han also gains the bonuses, which is really to say that the crit damage portion and some of these stacking health effects will be going over to Han as well. With the unique ability, it's all in the fur. This is the second Zeta and the Omicron ability, and what we're looking at here is a Territory War Omicron. Start of the battle, all Wookiee tanks taunt. All allies gain 20% defense and max health, and that is doubled for Wookiees. Whenever a Wookiee ally gains taunt, and this is important, all Wookiee allies gain 10% defense stacking for the rest of the encounter. Whenever taunt expires, all Wookiee allies recover 50% health, and at the start of each allied Wookiee's turn, they gain offense equal to 200% of their defense until the end of the turn. And that is just saying that as their defense is stacking, their offense will be stacking. And if there were no Galactic Legend enemies, whenever an allied Wookiee is critically hit, they reflect 50% of the damage dealt back onto the attacker. The main thing here I'm keying in on is the taunt mechanic, because the defense into offense pipeline really becomes taunts equals more defense equals more offense pipeline. So maximizing taunts will make this squad more of a threat. And all that is to say, mission may be mandatory. So head to the Synergies portion where I'm going to get into more of why that is and how it ties into this. The other portion here, the reflect damage will synergize with the second special, which applies provoked very well. As the enemy is attacked, they will counter and will receive secondary damage as their counters are reflected back, in addition to that portion from the unique where they're also contributing a bunch of speed. The Omicron ability, and again this is a territory war Omicron, start of the battle, all allies gain 25% defense, protection up, and tenacity up. So they're getting a good amount of extra tankiness that wasn't there with the base ability. And whenever an allied Wookiee is critically hit, Wookiee allies gain foresight and gain 5% defense stacking until the end of the encounter. And whenever an allied Wookiee has retribution, all allies gain retribution. That's pretty huge. And first time each Wookiee ally is defeated, all Wookiee allies have their cooldowns refreshed, and they recover 100% health and gain 25% offense until the end of the encounter. This will be a powerful territory war Omicron, but I would wait until you're at least relics to consider it. These kinds of stat boosts mean a whole lot more at relics than they do at lower levels. But this should mean that they are going to be a pretty effective defensive squad, and I would think that making sure you have some healing immunity might be pretty important here, because at least it's health recovery and not a health equalization. Now we got our synergies here. First thing, Chrysanthemum is our stand-in for Tarfful. He should be used with the Hut Cartel, with or without Jabba. But if you don't have a usable Hut squad, but have an Afra, not likely but possible, then he should go there. But if you are without both of those options, then you could consider Chrysanthemum under a Tarfful lead. You won't be able to use him in the territory battles because that's on the light side route, but his contributions will be limited. So while Tarfful's assets are not in-game, again, Chrysanthemum equals Tarfful for this exercise. At the top we have the main characters under consideration: Tarfful, Zelbar, Mission, Veteran Smuggler, Chewbacca, and Clone Wars Chewbacca. Chewie is going to stay with CLS, Vandor is going to stay with Dash or other scoundrels. I double checked all the kits, but the Tarfful synergies are not going to supersede the synergies that they have with their own respective squads. Their kits are just a little too tailored and dedicated to fit under a Wookiee situation. Although it would be possible, they would both work. Chewie and Vandor could still contribute. I think you don't gain enough compared to what you would lose. As the game stands today, Mission and Zelbar I believe should be on any Tarfful squad because of how taunts affect defense and defense affects offense. Any passive taunt is going to be extremely meaningful, especially when you take into account the larger cooldowns for the other Wookiee taunt abilities. Tarfful's special, which triggers taunt on the tanks, has a 4-turn cooldown. Clone Wars Chewbacca has a 3-turn cooldown on his taunt ability. But of the existing Wookiees that we have in game, Zelbar has the only passive taunt, but Mission has to be present in order to trigger it. Combine that with the Retribution and the Dot synergy, which is going to trigger Zelbar's protection recovery that Tarfful is going to provide. There's going to be a large amount of bonuses, which is going to contribute to them both being present here. Which is why as we go through and talk about these different lineups that we could consider, I left Mission and Zelbar in every one. Veteran Smuggler Chewbacca I actually like the least, and I may not ultimately end up utilizing him, although on offense I do think he works. What I don't like is he has a daze on his basic, which might end up minimizing the efficacy of what some of Tarfful's kit is doing. That daze is going to nullify the provoked, and the counter chance isn't going to be occurring, which will affect some of the other stat gain that is going to be happening under Tarfful. But he is an attacker that under a lineup like this could kind of use one. And Clone Wars Chewbacca right now is the only character that can provide health up, which will be a large heal to the squad, but it may or may not be necessary because of how tanky the squad may ultimately end up being. That's going to depend on testing. The rest of his kit has a minimal contribution. It's a pretty thin and sparse kit. Was one of the original kits of the game. So what I'm hoping for in this update is that it also brings along with it a touch-up to his kit, and maybe even a Grand Arena Omicron for Clone Wars Chewie that could provide something like another passive taunt. If that were to happen, then we're talking about a possible critical Omicron when placed with Tarfful. At a minimum, though, I would just like the touch-up, because there could also be a scenario where we get a territory battle Omicron on Clone Wars Chewie because of that light side Wookiee mission that they're clearly designing kits around for. And depending if we're utilizing this team on offense or defense, I think there's two distinct approaches that we can utilize here. On offense, I do think Veteran Smuggler Han does make a good amount of sense, and I actually prefer him over what Veteran Smuggler Chewbacca brings, but you need to bring in both in order to utilize Han. And it's because what Han is doing is bringing in a second AoE ability, whereas the team as it exists right now would only have an AoE from Zelbar. What those AoEs are going to do, it's going to be a twofold effect of triggering that provoked, which is going to increase a bunch of speed when they do their attacks out of turn. It will also increase the amount of reflected damage that they receive whenever they cause critical hits. And more attacks out of turn just mean more opportunities to cause that. We do need to be careful about the dazes, though, on a squad like this, because both Chewbacca and Mission are going to be contributing a daze, so I think it would probably be beneficial to just staying focused on a single character while you're utilizing the squad until the offense ramps up to a certain degree. On defense, we can take a slightly different approach that de-emphasizes offense and turns this more into like a timeout squad kind of strategy. We bring in Clone Wars Chewbacca, who again, he's the only Wookiee who has health up, and what health up does under Tarfful is turn it into a mass heal. They get 50% health recovery when Chewbacca utilizes that ability. And we are adding another taunting ability, which is just going to increase the amount of defense stacking and then increase the amount of offense. What I've added here, though, that's different is Barriss Offee, and it's because of how her Zeta and unique ability functions. Now, with Swift Recovery, I do think this is going to synergize very nicely under a Wookiee squad, because every time that she takes her turn, or at the end of each of her turns, she is going to cleanse one of the allies, the weakest of them, and what that is going to result in is not just turn meter for Barriss, but also turn meter for Tarfful. He will take more turns because Barriss is on the squad, and on top of that, whenever they're getting critically hit, they're going to be recovering health. So they're going to become way more survivable and really difficult to take out with Barriss on the squad. And before we move on to our wrap-up, I do want to talk about, in my quarterly speculation video, I think the one from January, I started talking about my boy Gungi. We are in full Gungi agenda mode. I think he could be brought in as an offensive replacement to a veteran smuggler Chewbacca to bring this squad to another level in the future, and I hope to see him. He could do things like add an AoE retribution to the squad, or even help with another taunt trigger, as well as adding additional buffs or maybe some mechanics like ignore defense or ignore protection. For our free-to-play gearing wrap-up, this is the gearing that I performed on March 13th. This was after Cal was added to the game. Zori were taking up higher in stars. She was brought up to gear 11 right away, and she's been great. Really at the 3-star level, she was completely usable. Considered the Omicron for a moment, but she's been getting me holds on a gear 11 squad without the Ami, so I'm going to be a little patient with that one. Cal Kestis here was new to the game, so I'm adding his Omegas and going to drop on his Zetas. I think his Zetas were pretty high quality, so I felt comfortable putting those on. Sometimes I decided I'll choose to test the character without the Zetas. Sometimes I'll do them automatically. And now we are also bringing him up to gear 11. This is how I handle these characters. I'm always taking the marquee characters immediately up to gear 11, always preparing for that. And it's turned out to be a huge help to me in Conquest this time around to have those stronger squads. TIE Defender I had farmed up from the Galactic Chase, and it took me a while to realize that I had forgotten to promote him to the final star. And the ship was great at 6 stars, part of the reason I didn't even notice. These are some of the project characters I would like to get up to either higher gear or up to relics. Just considering which ones I want to work on. My Sith Eternal Emperor progress. Getting closer and closer on all of these items. Chewbacca here, though, or Chewpio here, we're taking up to Relic 7 so that I can utilize that Datacron, which has been a pretty excellent Datacron. Normally I'm pretty careful with the Relic 7s, and depending on the character, I might not take just anyone up to Relic 7 in order to utilize a short-term benefit like a Datacron, but in the case of Chewie, that was a no-brainer. Now, I am going to put on the third most applied of the Amis on Swallow, and I think this is a massively underrated Omicron. It's the third one put on because it doesn't have the race synergies, but it is still really good, and it's what helps make some of those one-shot possibilities an option. Mando here, I want to make my Lord Vader counter better. Now, I'm not going to take him up to relics, but I am making him tankier and more survivable so that and we'll eventually get him up to relics, but I'm trying to conserve my Kairos, and you can see how low I am on some of those. And you can see the progress on Chieftain, Warrior, Cal, Seer Junda. We're not Seer Junda yet. Maul, bringing him up slightly higher. We'll get into Relic 7s, but I've got limited resources. Basically, I want my Maul squad to be more dangerous, so I brought him higher. I am really looking forward to the addition to Tarfful. Really like all of the kits that they've been adding for these Fallen Order characters. I think it's a great addition to the game, and it's making me pretty excited for what the near-term future can be and how Saw is going to contribute. So thank you for watching. Be safe out there, everyone. Be excellent to each other. This is still Plays Galaxy of Heroes.